So today we're going to be learning about how to do sig fig when you are adding and subtracting numbers. This is different than the multiplication and division rule that you've already learned. So the difference is when you're adding and subtracting numbers, you're going to round your answer to the least number of sig figs, but you're only going to look after the decimal. So we're going to look at the first example. And the first thing you're going to do is just throw those numbers into your calculator just like normal. And so the answer that you're going to get is 180.41. But again, with sig figs, you can't just write down any old answer. So we're going to line these numbers up in a way that'll make it easier to see what you have after the decimal for each one. So if you line these numbers up, and you write them so that their decimals are all together in a column, it can make it a little bit easier to see what you have after the decimal. So if I just draw a line like this, now I'm only going to look at what's directly after that decimal. So in my first number, the 3 and the 5 both count as significant. So I have 2 sig figs after the decimal there. In the next number, I just have that 0, and because it's a 0 after the decimal, it counts as significant, so there's 1 there. And in the last number, the 0 and the 6 are both significant, so I have 2 sig figs after the decimal there. So I want to take the least number of all of those options. So I want to make my answer match this 49.0, and so I want it to have 1 number after the decimal. So in my answer, that 1 number is going to be right here at this 4. So I have to write 180 point. Now the only thing to consider is, are you going to leave that 4 as it is, or are you going to round it up to a 5? And so to figure that out, you look directly after that at that 1. And because 1 is less than 5, you're just going to leave it alone. So your answer with correct sig figs is just going to be 180.4 milliliters. Just take those units back from the problem. So now let's look at the next one. So if I just throw this in my calculator, I get an answer of 140.59, but we need to look at the sig figs for how this is going to be. So we're just going to write our numbers out again, 150.0, line them up at the decimal point so that it makes it a little bit easier for you to see. So if I draw this line right here, it helps us to see that we're only going to look after the decimal at the sig figs that we have. So in the first number, this 0 is significant. So I have 1 sig fig after the decimal there. And in the second number, both the 4 and the 1 after the decimal are significant, so I have 2 there. Again, we want to take the least number of sig figs after the decimal, which matches this right here. So in my final answer, I only want to have 1 sig fig after the decimal. That happens right here at this 5. So I'm going to write 140 point, and now I just have to decide, should I leave it as a 5 or should I round it up to a 6? So look directly after it at that 9. Because 9 is greater than 5, that means you're going to round it up. So your final answer is going to be 140.6 milliliters. So now let's take a look at some of the problems. To make this a little bit easier for you, we already did the calculator math for you so that you can just focus on the sig figs. So let's go through some of these and see how we do. If you look at number 1, we're adding the numbers. So remember, only look at the sig figs after the decimal. So in my first number, I have 2 sig figs after the decimal there, and 2 there, and 3 there. So the sig fig rule for adding and subtracting is that I want the least possible number after the decimal, which is 2. So take the calculator answer that you were given and find the second sig fig after the decimal, which is at this 5. So you're going to leave the 3.3, and because the number directly after it is a 1, you're not going to round it up, you're just going to leave it as 3.35 centimeters. Okay? In the next question, again, you're going to look after the decimal. So I have 1 sig fig after the decimal here, and 2 sig figs after the decimal here. We want the least amount, so I want to make my answer only have 1 sig fig after the decimal. That is right here at this 7. So I'm going to chop my number right there. So I have to leave the 54. Because the number directly after the 7 is a 5, that means that you round that 7 up. So instead of that, you're going to write 54.8 kilograms. The next one gets a little bit tricky, but don't be afraid, we'll figure it out. So here we're going to just start looking after the decimal. There are 2 sig figs after the decimal here, 1 sig fig after the decimal here, and then this last number looks a little bit weird. It doesn't really have a decimal in it, but you know in your brain that really there's a decimal right there after the 6. But there are no numbers after that decimal, so that means that there is 0 sig figs after the decimal there. So we know in our heads that 0 is lower than 1 or 2. So we want our answer to have 0 sig figs after the decimal. So basically I want my number to stop at that decimal point and not have anything after it. I want it to be a whole number. So I'm going to leave that 5, and then I just have to decide, should I leave it a 3 or round it up to a 4? Because you've got a 2 after the decimal, and it's less than a 5, that means you can leave your number as 53 milliliters. Now it has no sig figs after the decimal, just like the original 6 in our problem. The next one, there are 2 sig figs after the decimal here, and 2 here. So we want to make our answer have 2 sig figs after the decimal. That happens right here at that 7. And it might look a little bit strange because there's nothing after it, but that just means that it's very easy. You don't have anything else to worry about. That number is already perfect as is. So you can just rewrite it for your answer and you're all done. All right, next one is a little bit of a tricky one again. So start by looking after the decimal. There are 2 sig figs after the decimal there. Here this number doesn't have a decimal, so you can draw it in for yourself. And notice that there's no numbers after those decimals. So we just put a 0 there. There's nothing after the decimal point in that number. The last number has 3 sig figs after the decimal. So given the choice of 2 or 0 or 3, 0 is obviously the lowest number. So in our final answer, we want there to be 0 sig figs after the decimal. So my number needs to stop right there at that decimal point. Then you just have to decide, should you leave this number as a 3 or should you round it up to a 4? Because right here you have a 7 that's greater than 5. That means that you're going to round your number up to 54 milliliters, and it now has 0 sig figs after the decimal. All right, let's try one more. In our last number right here, we've got 2 sig figs after the decimal there, and 1 sig fig there. That 0 does count. So 1 is the least number of sig figs. So I want my answer to have 1 sig fig after the decimal. That happens right here at that 9. Because of this 9 after it, that means that I have to round it up. And so you're going to round your entire number to 67.0 grams. So what I want you to do right now is see if you can do these problems on the bottom. Then I want you to pause the video, and when you think you have all the answers right, click on the video again and I will put the answers up for you. So pause the video right now and try it. So here are the answers that you should have for those bottom questions. If you got any of them wrong, come to class and just ask us and we'll help you figure them out.